Knew I was finished the moment Logan Hayes called an emergency all-hands meeting at 9:05 a.m. on a Monday. That gray, drizzly Austin morning when the world felt like it was buffering, and I was sitting in my home office staring at a grid of faces on my monitor. Not even 5 minutes into Logan's strategy realignment presentation, and I could already see my professional obituary being drafted in real time. My name is Brandon Mitchell. I'm 49 years old, and I'd been TechFlow Dynamics' go-to systems architect for 12 years. What Logan didn't know was that he was about to trigger the biggest mistake of his corporate climbing career. Logan was broadcasting from our downtown Austin office, his background a carefully curated blur of glass walls and motivational posters. He was our new VP of Innovation, a title that sounded impressive until you realized his definition of innovation usually involved firing the people who actually built things. On screen, he looked like he'd stepped out of a business school catalog. His hair was perfectly styled, his blazer that aggressive shade of navy blue that screams, "I'm disrupting your industry," and he wore that permanent smirk of someone who thought an MBA counted as real-world experience. "Team," Logan said, his voice dripping with that artificial enthusiasm they teach in leadership boot camps. "We need to discuss strategic alignment for our forward-facing initiatives." He clicked to a new slide. The header read, "Synergy and Consolidation." Here we go, I thought. In my 12 years at TechFlow, I'd seen this dance before. New executive comes in, needs to make their mark, usually by dismantling whatever the previous team built. "Effective immediately," Logan continued. "We're implementing full-scale IP consolidation. All R&D prototypes, sandbox environments, and personal development projects must be logged in our central repository by end of day Friday. This includes complete source files, technical documentation, and origin timestamps. My office will be reviewing all assets for patent filing optimization." The silence on the call was deafening. I could see the other video squares blinking as people processed what they'd just heard. My junior developer, Megan Torres, who usually had an energy drink in hand at this hour, froze with the can halfway to her mouth. I didn't freeze, but I felt something cold settle in my stomach. For the past 16 months, I'd been working on something I called the Ghost Protocol, an AI-driven logistics optimization system that could predict supply chain disruptions before they happened. I built it on my own time, using my own equipment, with my own money. Weekends, holidays, late nights after my official work was done. It had saved TechFlow over $2.8 million in fuel costs during our pilot program, optimizing delivery routes across the entire Southwest region. And I did most of that work from this home office, wearing comfortable clothes and listening to classic rock, thinking about my dad who'd spent 30 years at IBM and never got the recognition he deserved. I wasn't going to make his mistake. But apparently, results mattered less than control. This policy, Logan added, his eyes gleaming with predatory intent, ensures TechFlow owns the complete narrative of our technological advancement. That was the kicker. This wasn't about collaboration or innovation. This was about theft. Corporate, paper trail cleaned theft. Logan wasn't asking us to share our work. He was demanding we hand over the keys to everything we'd built so he could slap his muscle on it. For a moment, I wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe this was just corporate restructuring. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then I remembered the stories from my Air Force days, young lieutenants taking credit for sergeants' innovations, claiming battlefield solutions as their own strategic insights. I'd sworn I'd never let that happen to me in civilian life. I unmuted myself. Logan. His eyes flicked to my video feed. He didn't look annoyed. He looked amused, like a cat watching a mouse try to negotiate. "Yes, Brandon, I hope you're not going to push back on the consolidation requirement. I need clarification, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Does this apply to projects developed outside work hours on personal hardware? He smiled that shark smile. Brandon, if you're developing solutions relevant to TechFlow's roadmap, we consider it within our scope. We pay for your expertise, not just your logged hours. The condescension in his voice made my jaw clench. This kid, and at 34 he was a kid compared to my experience, was talking to me like I didn't understand basic employment concepts. I'd been building systems when he was probably still figuring out college majors. Even if no company equipment, time, or team members were involved, I pressed. Logan laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Listen, if you don't like the new policies, you can always resign. We need team players here, not digital hoarders. Digital hoarders. The phrase hit me like a slap. After 12 years of loyalty, of missed family dinners to fix their broken systems, of weekends spent optimizing their processes, he was calling me a hoarder for protecting work I'd done on my own time. The call went silent. This time, it wasn't shock. It was anticipation. Everyone was waiting for me to explode, to cite labor laws or demand to speak to HR. The old Brandon might have done that. The guy who spent his first few years at TechFlow trying to fit in, trying to be the team player they wanted. But something had changed in me over the past few months. Maybe it was watching my mentor Russell get pushed into early retirement. Maybe it was seeing how easily they'd dismissed other experienced engineers. Maybe it was just finally understanding that loyalty was a one-way street in corporate America. Understood, I said, my voice calm as glass. Then I smiled, not the friendly smile I usually wore in meetings, but something colder. Thanks for clarifying the situation, Logan. I clicked the red Leave Meeting button. The grid of faces vanished, replaced by my desktop wallpaper, a photo from my last fishing trip to Lake Travis, back when I still had time for things that mattered. I sat there for a moment, staring at that photo. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me. I'd expected to feel panic or rage, or at least uncertainty. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. I didn't throw anything. I didn't curse. Instead, I walked to my closet and pulled out a white cardboard box I'd kept flattened for emergencies. I taped the bottom shut with methodical precision, the same way I'd packed my gear after each deployment. See, Logan made a crucial mistake. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. He looked at me and saw a legacy employee, someone to be used and discarded when the corporate aesthetic changed. What he didn't see was the guy who'd spent 8 years in the Air Force working on logistics systems, the guy who understood that when someone tries to steal what you've built, you don't fight, you plan. And I'd been planning for a lot longer than Logan realized. Let me tell you about why I didn't lose my temper that morning. You have to understand the diner in Round Rock, about 16 months ago, long before Logan ever stepped foot in TechFlow. I was sitting in a booth at Mel's All Night, a 24-hour place that smelled of bacon grease and industrial coffee. It was 2:30 a.m. on a Saturday, and I'd been at TechFlow for 11 years at that point. I was the reliable one. The guy who fixed other people's code, who made half-baked ideas actually work, who saved executives from their own technical ignorance. But I was invisible. My name never made it onto the slide decks. My bonuses were always team-based, even when I'd carried the team through disasters that would have sunk other departments. I'd pitched a predictive routing system to my previous boss, Russell, months earlier. I told him we could use machine learning to anticipate supply chain disruptions based on weather patterns, traffic data, and historical delivery metrics. Too complicated, Brandon. Russell had said, patting my shoulder like I was an overeager kid. Sales can't sell algorithms. They need something flashy, something they can demo to investors. So they shelved it. But I didn't. That night at Mel's, with a half-eaten burger getting cold next to me, and a waitress named Nicole refilling my coffee without asking, I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped being just an employee. I became a builder. I opened my personal laptop, a machine that had never touched TechFlow's network, and started coding. I used open-source libraries I'd researched on my own time. I paid for my own cloud computing resources. I worked every weekend, every holiday, every night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. while my wife slept upstairs, thinking I was just catching up on work emails. The guilt of those missed family moments still eats at me sometimes. Sarah would ask why I was spending so much time in the office at home, and I'd tell her it was just regular work stuff. I couldn't explain that I was building something that might someday let me provide better for our future, give me the recognition I'd never gotten at TechFlow. I called it Ghost Protocol because it moved data so quietly that even our system administrators wouldn't notice it running alongside their regular processes. It wasn't just code. It was precision engineering built on everything I'd learned in the Air Force about logistics systems, how to move resources efficiently, how to anticipate problems before they happened, how to build redundancy into critical systems. The breakthrough came around month 8, when I figured out how to integrate real-time weather data with historical traffic patterns. The system could predict a delayed shipment in Houston 3 hours before the driver even knew there was a problem. It was like having a crystal ball for supply chain management. And now Logan Hayes, this 34-year-old MBA with 3 weeks of TechFlow experience, wanted to put his name on it and call it his innovation initiative. But here's what Logan didn't know. I'd been meeting once a month with Oliver King, a patent attorney who looked like he'd gone 10 rounds with corporate lawyers and won every fight. Oliver was a friend of my Air Force buddy, Scott, someone who understood what it meant to have your work stolen by people who'd never built anything themselves. We met at a coffee shop near the University of Texas, far from the prying eyes of the tech district. Oliver had reviewed every line of my code, every timestamp, every development log. The documentation was military precise, something I'd learned from dealing with Air Force procurement processes where one misplaced comma could kill $1 million project. "This is clean, Brandon," Oliver had told me 2 weeks before Logan's ultimatum. "You built this entirely outside your employment scope. TechFlow's intellectual property clause has specific carve-outs for work done on personal time without company resources. They have no legal claim to this." "They'll try anyway," I'd said, thinking about all the stories I'd heard from other engineers who'd been bullied into giving up their side projects. Oliver had grinned, the kind of smile that made opposing counsel nervous. "Let them. That's when we hit them with the patent interference suit. But Brandon, you have to be ready to walk away the moment they try to claim ownership. You can't give them any wiggle room to argue you developed this as part of your job duties." That conversation had been the turning point. I'd spent so many years being the loyal soldier, following orders, putting the company's needs ahead of my own. But loyalty had to be a two-way street, and TechFlow had made it clear they saw me as disposable. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the Air Force, we had a saying: "Proper preparation prevents poor performance." I'd been preparing for this moment, without even realizing it. Every carefully documented timestamp, every receipt for cloud computing costs, every email I'd sent myself with development updates, it was all building toward this confrontation. Now, sitting in my home office after Logan's threat, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my military days. The calm that comes from knowing you've done your homework. Logan thought he was dealing with a pushover employee. He was actually dealing with someone who'd spent 16 months building the perfect legal trap. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Oliver's number. Time to spring it. But first, I had one more piece of the puzzle to put in place. I needed to make sure Logan committed fully to his theft before we revealed our hand. In chess, you don't threaten checkmate until you're absolutely certain your opponent can't escape. And Logan was about to walk right into checkmate. I drove straight to downtown Austin, to a co-working space called Innovation Hub. It wasn't glamorous. The carpet smelled like energy drinks and broken dreams. But it had two things I needed: anonymity and a notary named Max, who didn't ask questions as long as the paperwork was in order. "Looks like someone's having a productive day," Max said, eyeing the stack of documents I'd prepared over the past few months. Oliver had helped me organize everything into a package that would make the patent office happy and give Logan's lawyers nightmares. "Let's make it official, Max," I said, uncapping my pen with the same steady hand I'd used to sign deployment orders years ago. What I filed were two provisional patent applications, one for AI-based predictive logistics routing and another for the Ghost Protocol architecture itself. The documentation trail was longer than a government contract and twice as detailed. I had proof I'd built everything on my own time, using my own resources, entirely outside the scope of my TechFlow employment. But the real masterpiece was how Logan had played himself. In his rush to consolidate power and impress the board, he'd actually loosened TechFlow's claims on pre-existing intellectual property developed by employees outside active project mandates. The new policy he'd implemented was designed to grab future innovations, but it had accidentally created a loophole for past work. Oliver had spotted it immediately, like finding a crack in enemy fortifications. As I left Innovation Hub, my phone buzzed. A text from Megan. "Logan's asking where you went. He wants you in the 2 p.m. sync. Everyone's freaking out about the IP upload deadline." Poor kid. Megan was 25. Brilliant, and still believed that hard work and loyalty mattered in corporate America. She reminded me of myself 15 years ago, before I learned that being indispensable just made you a target for people who wanted to take credit for your indispensability. I didn't, reply to her text. Instead, I drove to Zilker Park, sat by the water, and called Oliver while watching dogs chase frisbees. Sometimes the most important business gets done in the most peaceful places. "It's done," I said when he picked up. "Filed and time-stamped," Oliver confirmed, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Now we wait. Let him run with it. Let him build the marketing campaign, schedule the demos, promise investors the moon. We need them to commit publicly before we spring the trap. How long do we wait? Until he presents it as his own work." The moment TechFlow tries to commercialize your technology under their banner, we have them for willful patent infringement. The damages go from theoretical to very, very real. I spent the next week in a strange kind of peace. I didn't check work email. Technically, I was still an employee until they processed my resignation, but I wasn't about to give them any ammunition. I worked on my classic Mustang in the garage, something I hadn't had time for in months. There's something therapeutic about rebuilding an engine when your professional life is falling apart. Both require patience, precision, and the understanding that some things can't be rushed. But I wasn't idle. I was gathering intelligence. Using my personal laptop, I monitored TechFlow's public code repositories and developer forums. Logan wasn't working alone. He'd brought some hotshot programmers from his previous company, and they were frantically trying to reverse engineer the Ghost Protocol from the fragments they could access. It was like watching amateur mechanics try to rebuild a jet engine with a wrench and good intentions. I found commit messages like, "Why is load balancer failing?" and "Routing logic broken. Need original developer notes." One particularly desperate entry read, "Can someone explain why the AI predictions are just returning random numbers now?" They weren't building. They were panicking. They had the shell of my system, but I'd designed the core components to authenticate against a master key that only I controlled. Without that key, they had a very expensive collection of empty functions that looked impressive, but did absolutely nothing useful. 3 days after my resignation became official, a courier delivered a certified letter to my house. Standard corporate intimidation tactics. A letter from Rachel, TechFlow's legal counsel, reminding me of my post-employment obligations. Attached was a handwritten note from Logan on company letterhead that made my blood pressure spike. "Brandon, your abrupt departure has created significant operational challenges. We require immediate cooperation in transitioning Ghost Protocol assets. Failure to provide system access will be considered breach of contract and theft of company property." The arrogance was breathtaking. Not only was he claiming ownership of work he'd never seen before joining TechFlow, but he was threatening me with theft charges for refusing to hand over my own creation. I didn't respond to Logan's note. Oliver had been clear about this. Let them dig their hole deeper. Instead, I had Oliver send our first warning shot. The cease and desist order landed in TechFlow's legal department at 7:42 a.m. on a Monday, delivered by process server to ensure there was no question about when they received it. The subject line read, "Immediate halt of infringing activity. Patent interference case, 2X 2024-891. 4 pages of legal precision, citing specific components of Logan's innovation initiative that directly matched my patent filings. Oliver had included screenshots of TechFlow's development commits and timestamp comparisons with my notarized submissions. It was like presenting a murder weapon with the killer's fingerprints still on it. By 10 a.m., my phone started ringing. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Finally, a text. "Brandon, pick up. We need to clear up this misunderstanding immediately. Logan." I waited 10 minutes, then called back on speaker while I organized my garage tools. Let him sweat a little. "This is Brandon." "Brandon!" Logan's voice was high, breathless. He was trying to sound friendly, but stress was fraying the edges. "Listen, we got this confusing letter from some lawyer. I think there's been a mix-up about patent ownership." "No mix-up, Logan," I said, wiping down a wrench with deliberate calm. "Those are my provisional patents. The routing engine, the predictive algorithms, I built them independently on my own time." "That's impossible," Logan scoffed, though the laugh sounded forced. "Anything you worked on while employed here belongs to TechFlow. That's standard IP assignment." "Not under the policy revisions you implemented," I said, setting down the wrench. Section 4, Paragraph B of your new employee agreement. Pre-existing intellectual property not developed under specific managerial directive remains employee property. You loosened those restrictions to attract entrepreneurial talent, remember? I just walked through the door you opened. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear him breathing hard on the other end. "Brandon," his voice dropped an octave, the friendly mask slipping entirely. "We launch at the Southwest Tech Innovation Summit in 2 weeks. The press is invited. Investors are flying in. You are not going to derail this company over a technicality. It's not a technicality, Logan. It's ownership. You called me a digital hoarder. You told me to resign if I didn't like your policies. So I did, and I took my property with me." "You can't do this," he hissed. "I'll bury you in legal fees. I'll make sure you never work in tech again." "You're welcome to try," I said, genuinely calm now. "But Logan, you might want to check the Ghost Protocol module in your current build. I imagine it's throwing some interesting errors right about now." I hung up. 30 seconds later, Megan texted, "OMG, the entire routing system just crashed. Everything's gone." The demo is in 8 days and Logan is losing his mind. What happened? I felt a pang of guilt about Megan getting caught in the crossfire. She was a good kid who didn't deserve to be collateral damage in Logan's power grab. But I'd tried to warn her to stay clear, and hopefully this would teach her something about corporate loyalty that no business school ever could. You see, while Logan's team was playing with what they thought was my code, they'd left the actual back-end server running to make their development environment look legitimate. That back-end server had been checking for authentication from my personal license key, a key I'd revoked the moment I resigned. Without it, the system didn't just stop working. It announced exactly why. The next week was corporate chaos in real time, and I watched it unfold through industry forums and Megan's increasingly desperate texts. Logan doubled down, telling the board that my legal threat was a disgruntled employee's extortion attempt. He forced the remaining engineers to work around the clock trying to rebuild what they'd lost. But you can't reverse engineer genius under deadline pressure. I found Reddit threads with titles like, "My VP is making us rebuild a core system in 8 days because he fired the creator. Send help." The responses were brutal. RIP your company, and time to update those LinkedIn profiles. Meanwhile, Oliver and I were building an ironclad case. We had development logs, witness statements from my Air Force buddy Scott, who'd seen me coding on weekends, and video footage I'd recorded of myself working on key algorithms months earlier. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Ghost Protocol was mine, built on my time with my resources. The turning point came when Megan called me 2 nights before the summit. "Brandon, I have to tell you something. Logan's planning to fake the entire demo." "What do you mean?" "He's going to run a pre-recorded video and pretend it's live, functionality. He told the team that once investors commit, TechFlow can acquire a solution or rebuild post-launch. He's basically planning to commit fraud on stage." That was checkmate. If Logan presented fraudulent technology as a working TechFlow product while under a cease and desist order, he wasn't just violating my patents. He was committing securities fraud in front of potential investors. "Megan, listen carefully," I said. "Do not put your name on anything related to that demo. Document everything Logan tells you to do, but don't participate. You don't want to be anywhere near this when it explodes. What's going to happen?" "Justice," I said. Finally. The Southwest Tech Innovation Summit was held at the Austin Convention Center, and general admission tickets were surprisingly affordable. I bought one. Walking into that convention hall, I felt the same calm focus I'd experienced before important missions in the Air Force. Everything was in place. Oliver had federal marshals standing by with an injunction. The trap was set, baited, and ready to spring. Logan's TechFlow booth dominated the main exhibition floor. Massive banners proclaiming Ghost Protocol, revolutionary logistics AI, expensive demo hardware, and a countdown timer to his keynote presentation. He was working the crowd like a politician, promising revolutionary breakthroughs that would transform entire industries. When he spotted me in the audience, his smile faltered for just a moment. Then he walked over, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "You've got nerve showing up here," he whispered. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "Break a leg, Logan." I meant it literally. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting angry. It's being prepared when your enemies underestimate the quiet guy in the corner. Logan thought he was stealing from a pushover employee, but he was actually robbing a patient strategist who'd spent 16 months building the perfect trap.